Hello, everyone. Welcome to another monthly webinar by Tax Advisors. My name is Megan and I am the CEO. And today I'm joined by Alissa Stearman, who currently supports the co-founders of sweetgreen as their executive business partner and previously worked at Uber and Yammer and some other really great companies. And today we are going to be talking about the foundations of executive support. Before we jump into this, I just want to remind everybody who has not been with us before that we cannot see or hear you. Hopefully you can see and hear us though, and if not, please let us know. But because of that, if you have any questions or feedback for us throughout the webinar, feel free to go ahead and drop it in the chat feature or the Q&A section, and I'll be taking a look at that throughout the chat so that way we can answer any questions that you have. So thank you so much for joining us, Alissa. I'm so excited to have you back.
Thank you for having me. I love hanging out with you guys. It's always a good time.
It's the best. So Alissa and I decided to work on, do this webinar because her and I in the background have been working on a training that's more in depth on the foundations of executive support. And the first kind of chunk of the training is about these topics that we're going to discuss today. And so we thought, why not make a webinar out of it and share it with the whole world? So I'd love to dive in. And so I think the top 5 things we chatted about, I think they're 5. No, it's 6, just kidding. The top 6 things that we came up with were resourcefulness, communication, adaptability, relationship building, big picture thinking, and building trust. So why don't we start with the first one that we talked about, which is resourcefulness, which I think is so incredibly important in any type of service role. And I think of the top 2 biggest service roles being administrative support professionals and hospitality professionals, because we're always wearing 75 different hats. Typically, when we start in a new role, there's nobody that's welcoming us to our job. There's no book of best practices. You're thrown in to the fire. And you have a ton of crazy requests and you have to just figure it out. And so I'd love to hear from you, Alissa, if you have any funny or interesting stories. I know I do, about times where I've had to be really resourceful in my position, but we can go ahead and get started with you if you have one off the top of your head.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, there's been so many times in my career where I've either started a startup and it's here's your computer, and that was the onboarding, and you just have to figure it out. So with Yammer, that's literally what my onboarding was. It was 30 people. I was the first female. Here's your computer. And I had to figure out my job. So that's just a very ambiguous example. Something actually during COVID at sweetgreen, and oftentimes it's not until after we've accomplished these things that we're wow, I don't know how I got from A to Z, but I think necessity just makes you resourceful, and you have to there's no other option. You have to figure it out. So I remember we were doing a founder fireside chat series during COVID where we would have one of our founders interview another CEO or founder. And we always started those sessions with the guys holding up, or girls, females as well, holding up their salad of choice that we would send them so that they could kind of kick it off. It was a lunchtime series. And we had interviewed one CEO that was not in a market. And I don't think there was so much going on that I don't think I realized till that morning or it was the day before, that there was no way to get a salad to this person. So the morning of, I literally texted one of my best friends from Uber. He lives near the CEO, but not near a sweetgreen, but I knew he worked in Oakland, right near a new store. So I was texting him, some other people that I knew lived in the Bay, and he literally picked up this person's salad and drove it to his house, dropped it on his door. And when we got on to prep for this series before it started, the CEO said, "How did you get the salad to me? There's not one near me." So I had to, I wasn't planning on explaining to him. I didn't think anyone would even notice. And he was wow, I had no idea. So it's simple things like that we're asked to get someone a salad where no one has any idea. It actually was a big lift and took a bunch of finagling to make happen. And that's just kind
Yeah.
of like par for the course with our roles. I feel like those kind of things come up every day, every week, and we just sort of have to like figure it out in the moment.
Yeah. It reminds me of back in the day, and I'm going to age myself now, but this was back like over a decade ago, before we had smartphones, before navigation was in cars. And this is when I was a front desk agent working at the Ritz-Carlton, and I was also manning phones. And we had guests who flew in from Japan, and they didn't speak any English. And they called the hotel frantic because they couldn't figure out how to get from the Orlando airport to the hotel. And it's not like super difficult. There's like one major highway that connects the airport to the hotel. But if you don't speak English and you don't have road signs, like I can imagine it would be really, really difficult. And I obviously I don't speak Japanese. For anybody who's wondering, I'm not a lick of it. So I went on Bing Translate. Because Bing Translate was like the search engine of choice at the time, and had to like type in directions and like type in like have it translate in Japanese and hold the phone up to the computer to get these people to at least a safe space, while like in the meantime reaching out to the one and only Japanese speaking person who worked in the hotel at the time, whose day was off, by the way, but I found his cell phone and I called him and I'm like, I have these guests, they're lost. I got them to this gas station in a safe neighborhood. Is there any way I can transfer you on the phone to speak with them and get them to the hotel? And luckily he was able to connect with them. He got them to the hotel safely. But like, if it wasn't for Bing Translate, I would have been completely screwed. And these people would probably be somewhere in the middle of Orlando to this day.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just like part of the gig, honestly.
Yeah. You got to think on your feet, and you bring up, you know, something we're going to talk about in a second, is like the importance of having good relationships with people. Thank God you had that friend at Uber, and thank God that there's this lovely Japanese speaking chef at the hotel who wasn't upset that I called him on his day off, because, you know, we were able to get that done. So I'd love to kind of hear from you. Like, do you think resourcefulness is something that's inherent, or do you think it's something that's learned?
I think maybe some people have a better sense of it. I think when you go through, you know, things either personally in your life that are challenging or in work, like you kind of hone that craft and skill. And so the more you do it, the better at it you become, and the bigger things you're finagling and bigger fires you're putting out. And so I really feel like over time, it's something that can be really crafted. But I do think like some people have a better sense of it than others, but I don't think it's something that can't be worked on or crafted or really honed in on.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that, you know, some people have had like, you know, experienced more adversity maybe earlier on in their life and were pushed, or not even pushed, but not given an opportunity other than to try it to survive. But I think every time, like, even for me in starting this company, like I've never started a company before. I never put together a business plan before. I had never directly hired people, like all of these things I never had to do. And I'm sure the same thing for you, like you said when you started at Yamarite, which I think was your first EA position, like they gave you a computer and they're like, figure it out. So it's like, I need this job. I need to make money. I need to survive. I need to figure this out. And so I think if anything, it's more so pushing yourself as a person to like get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's the only way you're going to become and learn how to be more resourceful.
Right. I think there's like a biological component to it, because it is kind of a survival skill.
Yeah.
And, you know, people that didn't know where the next meal was coming from when they were younger had to figure out what they were going to eat. And that's a very like basic example, but yeah, it's a sense, even in a work situation, it's a sense of survival of like, I need to keep my job. I need to figure this out.
Yeah, absolutely. So then the next thing we were going to talk about was communication. And this is one of my favorite topics. And we do all kinds of trainings and talks about communication, because I really do believe the communication, whether it's with your executive, with your teammates, with your family members and friends, like a lot of issues and misunderstandings can be solved with excellent communication skills. And so I'd love to understand like what communication looks like with you as it relates to the support role with your current or previous executives.
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest pillars, if you will, that we kind of worked out for this training. It is just the foundation of, to your point, every single relationship in your life, personal, business, like it is so important. And so it's something I've really crafted well, I think, with my CEO and executives in the past. For example, I just think you need to find what works. So for example, my CEO and I, most of our communication is over text. We're back in the office now, so I have a standing one-on-one with him every week. Even during COVID, we had a standing one-on-one, but we did it over phone. If it's anything urgent or I'm not in proximity to him, he'll call me. Emails for anything that's like a task-oriented item. And so we have all these different methods. And I think you have to get really clear on what you guys will use for which mode of work, and see what works. And it's kind of a practice that you have to see over time. You know, it can be tricky in the beginning working with a new executive, but I've worked with execs that only called me or only texted or purely email, or ones that never got around to checking email. So literally just text all day, every day. So I think you just really have to find what works, and also take into account like the topic you're discussing or the work problem you're trying to solve. And is it something that's better discussed live on the phone, on a video chat, or in person? Or is it something that's quick and can be texted or emailed or Slack or whatever you use? And I really think that's very important, because oftentimes we're all moving so fast, and in written word, a lot can be taken out of context. Tone is missing, tone can be misinterpreted. And so if it's something bigger, a bigger project or a more important topic, either be very clear in your written communication and take time to write it, and don't send it right away. Sit on it, read it again the next day or later if it's not super time sensitive, and then send it. Otherwise, I suggest having those conversations in person, because you can hear
100%.
tone, you can feel body language. There's less to be taken out of context or misinterpreted.
Yeah. I'm constantly like, we talk about this all the time, even internally at my company. I'm like, if there's ever something that is like remotely a touchy subject, like get on the phone or do a video call, because we're all remote too, because it's just, there's so much to be misconstrued over Slack and email. And it's just like, it's a slippery slope. So, you know, it just has so many nuances, like Abby said.
Even like such a small example, but I respond to texts a lot with okay. And that's my way of acknowledging. But it's been interpreted by people, not even just with work, but in my personal life, as being like curt or I'm unhappy. Yeah. And I'm like, no, that's very neutral. It's just 2-letter, like, okay, like I heard you, it's acknowledged. And so even like such a small example like that, it's just really important to be super, super clear with your communication and intentional too.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too, to mention in regards to communication, it's not even about like the cadence in which you're communicating, because I know that's a lot of what we were just talking about is, you know, how does your exec want to be communicated with? Is it call, text, email, depending on priority? But it's also like your communication style. And I think it's important to meet them where they're at, or anybody for that matter. Like, I am not super robust in the way I communicate over email. Like I try to keep things super direct and concise. And if I can use bullets, I can. And so like, it's very overwhelming to me when I receive an email that's like 7 paragraphs long. Like I'm like, and also everybody on my team knows that I just like hate email in general. And so we like try to move everything as much as possible to like Slack or like in-person communication. I actually got called a boomer the other day because I like pick up the phone and I constantly call. Like I just want to talk to people on the phone. And one of my friends called me that and I was like, what? I don't. And then I got the reference and I'm like, okay, well, sorry that I like to talk to people on the phone. I apologize. But yeah, so I think it's important about like meeting people where they are in their communication style and like using your emotional intelligence to see like how are they communicating over email, and let me try to like meet them where they're at that way or in through text.
Right. And I do think too, that you not only do you have to meet them where they're at holistically, but on any given day, because our executives are human as well, and they're going through life situations, personal challenges. And so if they're having a tough day and they're not wanting to joke around or be casual, don't be casual in your communication conversations with them. So
that's a good
meet
point.
them where they're at as far as method, but also from a people skill component and empathically. I think that's a big component to our world as well, is just like kind of being empathic and being able to see where people are at on any given day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about adaptability. This is kind of a good segue into that because it's, adapting your communication style, but I think just adapting to like the intensity and like craziness of this role. And I think that if someone is not adaptable in this administrative position, you'll literally go insane, because I know about executives who on a day-to-day basis just go, clear my schedule, I don't want to go to any meetings today, or clear my schedule, I have like a huge pitch I have to prepare for, or whatever it might be. And like, I know it breaks your heart. I know like you made a perfect calendar with excellent buffers and then it just like, you're like, all this work was put into it, but like, that's part of the gig. And so I'd love to hear from you, Alissa, because I feel like you're like one of the most unflappable people that I know. Like, how do you view adaptability and the way that you like perceive your role?
Thank you. That's actually a very big compliment. I actually have one person in particular at Sweetgreen is always like almost every time I see her, she's like, I can't imagine your world. Like, how are you always so calm? And I'm like, thank you for saying that, because internally I feel like I'm like firing on all cylinders. It's I think I may have brought this up in our last webinar, but that meme, that's the little dog holding coffee and the room's on fire because everything is fine. Like, that is me every day. So it's good that I've been able to maintain neutrality. But yeah, adaptability is a need, not a nice to have in this role, because to your point, you will go insane if you're like tied to the work you do or the priority you're running with or the task you're working on. Most often, like more times than not, it's going to change. So I think if you approach your work in that sense of like, this is tentative, everything I do is tentative, even a big project is tentative, it will make your life a lot easier. And it does, like, it sucks sometimes. Like you create a whole like week-long traveling tour or an event or something that is just like canceled like that, and you have to go back and just undo your work. But that has happened to me, luckily, because of all the work that was done ahead of time. Then when it was planned for the next time, the heavy lifting was all done. It was a plug and play situation. So not everything's lost. And I think if you can think about things like that, it will set you up for much more like mental, psychological success. But yeah, like it can be tough. I remember at Uber, we were planning 1,000-person event in Mexico City, and 2 months before it was supposed to happen, we canceled it and turned it into three-day events in 3 different cities: Chicago, San Diego, and Tokyo. We had 2 months to plan them. There were 350 people each. So that was a tough one, but there was no time to like sit and be upset about it, because we had 2 months to plan 3 massive events. So it's like, it's not having an emotional tie, and it's being able to pivot, and it's how you can then pivot, like you're literally on a dime flipping to something new. And so it's sort of in how you can like gracefully change priorities at any given time.
Yeah. And I love what you said about like that mentality of, even though like I did this huge event or I planned this big thing and like it didn't go through, now you have all that work done and like filed away and this experience that you can just pull it out and again in the future. And I do that all the time in my role, and I've done that in previous roles, right? Where like I worked on a project or I did an idea and it didn't float this time, but then I mean I'm the person that like literally keeps everything. Like I have like perfect example, like in my HR class in college, it was all about like writing resumes and like preparing for interviews. And like you bet when I started this company, I went and pulled out those notes because I'm like, let's see if there's anything from college that I learned and I like had done all this work on. You know what I mean? So I think it's like thoughtful to like always say like this is another notch in my belt and another experience that I had and like learning opportunity. And like we stopped it this time, but you never know when you're going to need it in the future, even 10 years from now.
And I think that translates into a lot of things. Like, you know, I'm sure a lot of people that are joining today are maybe in the midst of interview process, maybe with one or several companies. And if you don't get that job, you networked, you met someone new, you made new relationships that will most likely come back around in some way during your career. And you also practiced interviewing. It's a massive skill to like craft, honestly, and just practice. And so again, it's like a reframe of like, oh, I didn't get the job or this project got canceled, but you learned a lot and you will use it later. And just being able to see things from that angle.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because a lot of people who work with us, like we do interview preps for candidates that are interviewing with our clients. And I love when I work with the candidate from 3 years ago that I worked with who came back and they're like, I have all my notes pulled up from 3 years ago. And I'm like, well, this just made the next 30 minutes so much easier. Like, let's just pick up where we left off 3 years ago. All right, let's go. You know what I mean? I think you make such a good point. And again, like every connection that you make, every touch that you have with somebody, like you never know when you're going to need to connect with somebody again in the future. So I think that's awesome, which kind of goes into our next segment, which is relationship building. Did you do that on purpose?
Kinda, but it works well.
It does. So let's talk about like building relationships in regards to like the business setting. And so how do you go about building relationships when you're starting a new role, you know, with your executive and with the community and company as a whole?
Yeah, this is another one that, along with communication, I just think is so important. I mean, all of these pillars are like, you know, foundational, but relationships are so important. You interface and touch every part of a company really when you're in this role. So you need to build really good relationships, not only with your own executive, but the executives they're working with and possibly an entire executive team. The people on the executive's team. So either if it's a CEO, then that would be the executive team, and then the people probably in a VP level position in each of those teams. If you're supporting a different C-level executive, it's going to be their team. So VPs, directors. I think a really good way to go about that when you first start at a company is meeting as many people as possible, joining meetings, trying to get up to speed on priorities, personalities, who works with who like the cross-functional work. Again, we're in person, so it's a bit easier to meet people in the kitchen that you maybe haven't met before because we spent 2 years in a pandemic, and who are all these people? And so, you know, there's a lot of times recently where I introduce myself and what team are you on? And, oh, okay, like I recognize the email. It's so nice to put a name to a face. It will just help your job so immensely if you understand who you're working with and not everyone's just a name that you're emailing. You'll get better buy-in if you've built those relationships and you have kind of that trust with the different people on the different teams. It just enables you to be given more, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, you can't build the trust without having the relationships. And I even think, you know, personally, I like to build relationships with other people in my role at other companies. I'm very close with our board members, executive assistants, executive business partners. One of them I actually mentor now because, she was a bit more junior and had called me out of the blue one day and just said, can I get your advice? And we talked for an hour and now we're really good friends. And she was able to get a title change. And I think she was given a $15,000 raise and she just recently got another $10,000 raise.
Amazing.
Because of just, we didn't know each other before, just interfacing an email. And so really leaning into those and either giving mentorship or getting it, asking for it, people are usually very willing. Even before we went public, there was a CEO of a public company that my CEO was emailing with. And so I was interfacing with this person's executive business partner. And I just asked if I could talk to her because we were about to go public. And I said, I just want to pick your brain on like what I'm going to experience and what I can expect. She was more than, again, we talked for like an hour. She was like, anytime you need me, text me. And then just like out in the community. So sweetgreen it's a food company, it's a tech company, and we kind of also intersect CPG, consumer packaged goods space. And so I like anywhere I am, like at Erewhon, which is for those not in LA, it's like a high-end grocery store that's very like nicely curated with wonderful wellness products. And I could spend days in there. I was just at a health food conference a couple of weeks ago, and I saw one CEO that did a demo for our culinary team, and I like waved at him. I was like, I did the tasting with you at Sweetgreen. He was like, oh, and I've emailed with him a bunch. And so even just those instances, the relationship building is equivalent to network building. And so you never know 100%. When those relationships will come back around, or maybe later in your life, you're looking for a job that this person's connected to whatever CEO, or you just don't know. And they're really important. But aside from like propelling yourself forward, it's just nice to make connections with people, especially after the last 2 years of what we've been through. Yeah, it's nice to have connections and people all over the world that if you're visiting in a city, you can, have a cup of coffee with them, or which I actually did with Meagan. We met in person for the first time. I was in Miami for my birthday, and we had never met in person, but we've talked so many times that
I know
we had. But
I know it was weird because I'm like, I know we haven't met, but like I feel like we met.
Yeah, it's just a really good skill to have that will serve you well over the course of your career.
Yeah, I think there's a couple like two big things I want to point out on this, which is one is it's just good to give. Right? It's good to give your time. It's good to give advice. It's good to, make connections with people because it's just a good thing to do and it makes you feel good. But I think the other thing that's important that you talked about is the importance of building relationships with EAs, and not only within your company, but externally. And I want to talk about the part of building relationships with EAs within your company, because I don't think there's like any better alliance that you can have to like get things done and move business forward than a really strong EA team. And I've seen all kinds of EA teams and starting this company and even before that, and the dynamics between them. And the companies that I've seen do the best are the ones that have a high functioning EA team that works well together. And so I think that's just so incredibly important to always come from a place of like best intent. Because I've seen some interesting dynamics where people are like, I understand the importance of gatekeeping for your exec, but also like you got to give to get sometimes, and like always coming from a place of like best intent and curiosity when someone wants to schedule a meeting, because we're all trying to move the same business forward. Yeah,
definitely. I think it's super important. And it's actually because I spent quite a bit of time helping hiring and building out the EA org at Uber. When I started, it was 12. And it was 12 EAs and only for the executive team. And when I left, I believe we were at 120, and I left in 2017 when the company was 20,000 people. So it was massive scale, and I was part of that process heavily. So when I've now done it at Sweetgreen, I have full buy-in from the entire executive team. I worked with them on scoping out the different leveling. We have 3 right now. Different levels within Sweetgreen. So I worked with our chief people officer on that and got full executive buy-in from the exec team when I presented it to them, because they didn't even totally understand different leveling until it was very clearly laid out for them. But after I've now hired, we have 3 other EVPs besides myself and an admin assistant who reports to me and an office manager. This is something I am complimented on all the time, is my eye for talent and who will be successful in this role. And I've built a really solid team here, and we just like a well-oiled machine, and we all respect each other. There's no ego. You know, my the admin that works under me is a little more tactical and setting up rooms for meetings and stuff. But if she's running around doing other stuff, I'm setting up the room. Or if my CEO is up when she's, you know, he'll text both of us sometimes on one chain. And if she's not up, I'm looking at flights, which is not something I would normally do. It's something that she would handle, but it doesn't matter. It's something that needs to get done. And I think when you approach your work like that, you know, we oftentimes work in silos, but it really is, you do have to have the team mentality. No ego. There's no place for it. To your point, like we're all on the same team working towards the same goals. And here at Sweetgreen, like we're all helping each other at all times. And it's pretty wonderful because, you know, at Uber, there was some growing pains, as we all are aware, because the media. And so it was tricky then at times, you know, it was very different in the end from when I first started there with the way everyone sort of worked together. And so it's really lovely to work in an environment where we are all truly like approaching our work in the same way.
Yeah, I love that. And like I said, there's like nothing more beautiful and harmonious than like a well-oiled EA team who loves to work with each other. It really is great.
Yeah.
Well, can you think of a time in like previous roles where you had to work with somebody? It doesn't even necessarily have to be an exec, but it could be a colleague or another, you know, EA, where it just was a challenge, like challenge working with them, challenge building a relationship for whatever reason, and how you handled that and how you overcame that.
Yeah, I will say, luckily, I haven't come across many people in my career that I've had a challenge to work with. I do think part of our role is kind of, along with the adaptability, is kind of being a chameleon. And I've worked with so many different types of teams and types of people in my career, like worked with a lot of product and engineering people at Uber and Yammer. And those people are very different than brand or culinary team, or, you know, and so you have to be able to work with all types. But yeah, I have had challenges in the past, and it's usually comes down to communication thing. And I'm pretty direct. So when it gets to a certain point of just, you can feel your own frustration and their frustration, I sat this person down, and it was kind of what I touched on before. Like, we're both on the same team. We're trying to accomplish the same goals. I felt like the issues came from that person's maybe insecurity or wanting to control. You know, there were comments made like, my executive's more senior than yours. And I'm like, why is that even a topic? And that has no bearing on anything. Like, again, same team, same roles, same goals. And so, you know, I think the direct communication of, you know, we are on the same team, we're trying to do the same thing. Like, what do you need from me? And this is what I need from you. And being very clear, either like, you know, I really don't appreciate the tone that you talk to me. And then they have an opportunity to say, sorry, I'm going to do better, or explain that, you know, again, in written word, like, that's not what I meant. But then at least you're making it clear, like, this is how it's interpreted. But I think if you go into the conversation of not just like, this is what you're doing that offends me, you have to be receptive to the feedback as well. And I would start with that. Like, what am I doing that isn't sitting well with you, is rubbing you the wrong way? Like, what do you need? And I will try to adapt. Before you're just like, you do this and this and this, and it bothers me. Don't start with that. Give them an opportunity, because I think it diffuses the situation and it sets you up to have a more beneficial conversation. But I really think direct communication, when you're working with someone where it's just for whatever reason, personality differences, communication styles, just have the conversation. It can be awkward at first, but once
so
you're
awkward.
once you're starting to have it and both people are kind of relaxed, I think usually like people walk away from those feeling much better.
Yeah.
So whatever you can do to kind of get over that hump or the scary aspect of it, and just, you know, approach the person with, I want to do what's best for the company and be able to work really well together. Let's just sit down and see how we can do that. You can really only have a beneficial conversation from there.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we're doing internally at TAC, and I did it at my former company, that's how I learned about it, is this training called Conscious Leadership. And there's this really great book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And they have a whole framework on how to approach and communicate with somebody when there's a conflict. And one of the first things you do is you kind of just sit with each other and you kind of feel within your body, like, okay, what am I feeling right now? Am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling angry? Am I feeling frustrated? Like, what are the feelings that I'm feeling? And then you start with yourself and say, I'm feeling frustrated because of this, or I'm nervous about having this conversation because I don't know how you're going to respond to what I have to say. And like by just starting a conversation that way, it immediately diffuses the conversation, like the whole problem. And I remember, 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. Thanks, Melania. It's an amazing book. They have like a ton of free resources on their website. I think it's conscious.io. And, you know, I went into this conversation with my boss pretty upset. And I just told her right from the start, like, I'm really nervous about having this conversation because I'm not sure how you're going to respond to it. And then she said, I'm walking into this conversation nervous because I don't know why you want to have this meeting with me. So we both kind of laughed about it and we were like, okay, let's move forward. And I just think it's so incredibly important. And I think you, like, to your point of sometimes just sitting instead of like holding in and creating these stories in your head of how someone's going to respond or how things are going to go, and just having that conversation can often diffuse and help you move forward dealing with somebody who can be challenging or difficult.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so then I think the next topic is big picture thinking, which is interesting because I usually, to me, I almost think like big picture thinking is like the opposite of living in the details and the minutia, which is, you know, a huge part of the administrative support role. And so I'd love to understand from you why you think big picture thinking is like the next foundation of this position.
Yeah, this is something I talk about a lot. And I think oftentimes people are confused, or they're like, like I never really thought about it that way. I think being a really truly effective business partner to an executive, you have to understand what's going on at the company at any given time. You have to be super aware of OKRs or whatever sort of goal system you use internally, roadmaps, priorities, problems happening, to be able to then like zoom down on any given thing, to be able to work in the details and have a whatever problem solve or suggestion for your executive of this is where you should spend your time based on ABC. And I think if you don't do that, it becomes very tactical, but you're also, I'm trying to like craft my words, but it can be a bit of a reactive role rather than proactive, where you're constantly just whack-a-moling with the requests instead of getting ahead of things because you understand the state of the business, where your executive is, where his head or her head is at. And it really enables you to be very proactive and beneficial and efficient in your role when you're able to zoom out and then zoom in. It's like this constant, like, you know, like bird and dive.
Yeah. And I would be curious to know, because not everybody has the opportunity to like sit in meetings with their executives, right? Like that's often something that comes along with building trust, which we're going to get to in a second. So for somebody who's new in their role or like just getting started as an assistant, or maybe like the company culture just does not allow you to have access like that, like what are some other ways you would recommend people being able to get that bird's eye view of what's happening across the entire business?
And that's where we go back to relationships, because when you build relationships with stakeholders in any given team, you can then, like, there was a time when I joined, for instance, a culinary working weekly meeting that my executive didn't join, but I wanted to understand what was going on in that team and make my relationship stronger with the people on that team. Plus, I just like food, and I think they're so amazing and fun. But it's a really good way. Like, join the meetings that your executive isn't in. People will be receptive because you're trying to build relationships with them and also just gain understanding. And if you explain that to them, I'm trying to figure out what's happening in so-and-so's world a little bit better. Would I be able to join this weekly meeting and just listen in? I think that those are really good things you can do to build trust across the company and organizations and individual teams. But also, if you're not having super clear communication with your executive yet, or you're trying to work on that, you can get ahead of things that way and go to him and be like, I know this is happening. I'm joining this meeting and this is what I heard. So based on that, I think you should be here, or this is coming down the pipeline, or whatever it is. And then you're building trust with your executive that way, because they see your interest, your dedication, the fact that you're joining meetings, you don't have to, but to get an understanding to do your job better, it speaks volumes. So it's kind of a win-win.
And even going back to the building relationships piece of leveraging the admin team within your organization, if you have an admin team, and I think the best EAs organizations that I've seen, if either all the C-level EAs are regularly meeting once a month or even weekly to talk about what's going on across their orgs with their executives and what's important. And then if it's a really big organization, in the org, that EA team is chatting, and the leader of that org that's working with the other C-level executive assistants are communicating and trickling that information, so that just across the entire company, what's going on, right? Like, if you're an Eng, like, yes, Eng is important, but you need to understand how Eng relates to product and how product relates to, marketing and everything else. And so I would say, like, really lean on each other. If you're not having at least minimally a monthly company admin sync, you should probably get that on the calendar. And then again, within like the org, if not weekly, bi-weekly, like syncing and talking about what's going on, because that's, again, like, working together is what drives the business forward.
Yeah, we have weekly meetings here just to check in, and even if there's not a ton to discuss at any given time, we go around and give updates on our teams and just kind of tie all our work together. But even if there's not any pressing items, we still meet, because it's just nice to get FaceTime with each other. That helps with the relationship building, and it kind of, there's something to be said for forging relationships with people in your role, because no one understands this role like other people that are in it. Really, like, no one else can understand. Our executives don't even truly understand. And so just having those people that you can understand best practices or get advice or anything, it's just really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, last but not least, we've alluded to it a little bit, but it's about trust. And, trust is a big one. It's something that, in my opinion, I think is earned over time. Occasionally you get executives who just come from a place of trust day one, but I'd say that's probably like fewer and far between. And I think more people come from a place of like, or trust is earned. And so I'd love to hear from you, how you approach building trust with your executives and your peers.
Yeah, I think, this is foundational. And again, it's not just work, it's every relationship. You start small and build it up with friends, with partners, in work. And I think you can't, there's no formula, there's no like secret sauce. It's just starting small and getting incremental buy-in. And as you do that, you're then given bigger projects, you're then leaned on more, you're given teams to manage or whatever, because they know you can do it. And that's huge. It's actually quite a big compliment. But like an example at Sweetgreen, when I started, they didn't really have true executive support before me. And so I came into just like, like chaos. And I started with something I think is very small and fundamental, which was their calendars, they were a complete mess, like no rhyme or reason. And that's actually part of like the tactical part of this role that I truly enjoy still to this day. I love calendar management. I think it's super strategic. It's like Tetris. It's almost like cathartic for me because I just like organizing. But I started with them, and I was like, can I just do my thing of like how usually I structure my executives' time, and you can give me feedback and we can go from there, but I'll give you a start. And I organized all their calendars. I color coded. I put strategic thought into when their one-on-ones were versus external meetings, like time of day and time in the week. And they were truly blown away. And I was like, kind of like, oh, this is normal, but they had no idea. And so from a very early time in my career here at Sweetgreen, I was able to get like pretty large trust and buy-in from them, and then like, oh, well, it's almost like they didn't know what they didn't know. And so I kind of did this for them, and they were like, oh, okay, well, I thought that was like a big thing. Well, I can give her this task, or she can manage this project. And over time, then you like open your eyes and realize you're like managing 2 teams and working on different projects you never have before. And then that goes back to resourcefulness, where like you're figuring it out. So along the way, it's kind of at each point, you're like realigning all these different pillars. You're getting more trust. So then it goes back to resourcefulness. And then it goes back to adaptability when those things in your new project are constantly changing. And it's really like this cyclical process.
Yeah, I agree. And I tell everybody, and this is even part of like my pitch when I talk about TAC advisor services, they're like, well, what does TAC do? And I don't go into like the tactical part of like, we do recruiting, training, coaching. I'm like, we help executives save their most important resource, which is their time. And then their face lights up because that's really all they care about. Like, let's just be honest. They're like, I just want to like squeeze in every ounce I can out of this day with business and personal. And like, I think that's absolutely the first most important thing you can do when you're in an executive support role is like master that calendar. And I always say kind of like the tripod of this role is like calendar, travel, expenses. Like it's a pain point in every single person's life. And if you can go in and just knock those out right away, you're going to immediately move up in the trust, like so quickly and be able to take on those projects.
Yeah. When you like start with the low hanging fruit is what I always say. And it's those 3 things. And once you like knock those out or get super streamlined with them, then it's on to new and bigger things.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I want to dig in because I know we have some Q&A and we have like about 12 minutes left. So we had one person say, what's your advice on how to get a hold of your exec when he's constantly traveling and or in meetings, not urgent, but needs decisions soon? Fortunately, he tries to keep our weekly one-on-ones, but sometimes we have to cancel if we can't find any time.
I think, again, this goes back to figuring out what works with your executive. Sometimes my one-on-one will shift as well. What I started doing with my execs is at the end of the week, I send a weekly wrap up so they can see all the pending items that I'm waiting on answers for. I also have a tracking spreadsheet of everything I'm working on for them and the status of it. And my admin goes in and adds any notes or anything. And so all 3 of us are on the same page. I have one for our CEO, another for another exec. And that really helps. Like at any given time, your executive can go into this document and see what is outstanding between the 2 of you. That's super helpful. But I do feel like the weekly wrap ups, or maybe it's the end of the day. If something's not urgent, but it's time sensitive, you can send like a wrap up of the day. Like, here's where we're at on ABCD, and here's what I need answers on ABCD. And very, like to your point, Meagan, earlier about if an email is overwhelming for you to write or read, it's overwhelming for the recipient to read. Make it super concise, super clear, bullet point, question, so they can just answer in line and you can see it very clearly. No paragraphs, make it just super, super clear.
Yeah. And again, I think this goes back to being adaptable and resourceful. And so like you use a spreadsheet. With my team, we have a couple of different ways. And again, I hate email. I'm like, don't send me an email. I don't want to see it. So like Rachel, who's my administrative business partner on the biz dev side, she started putting little reminder blocks of the outstanding things that she needs me to do in red on my calendar. And then I'm like, okay, that's a good reminder. And then like Alexa also has found a lot of like lack of just sending me like bullets in Slack, because again, I don't want to look at email. And so like, that's another one. I was talking to a client the other day who is in person with their assistant. This person's like a hybrid EPA and is back to back to back to back on calls and traveling. So when they are in person and the EA is taking phone calls for him, he writes them down on sticky notes and then he puts them on sticky notes on the desk. And then the exec, while he's in meeting, can like scribble answers on them. And then he takes them and like runs away and deals with it. Like, because he doesn't want to get pinged during meetings, right? So there's like a million different ways that you can slice this bread.
Right.
And just being like resourceful and trying new things. It might be a Trello board. It might be, people are using all kinds of like ClickUp and Asana, and if it's helpful for somebody to just be able to like go in and like answer something in a tool, like that could be another option. So I would just get super creative and try different things. And actually, with stickies.
You mentioned something really interesting. So for those who don't know, Alexa, who is Meagan's executive business partner, used to work for me at Sweetgreen, and I had connected them. But we never use Slack. Like, we use Slack internally at Sweetgreen. I dislike Slack heavily. So like, her and I never used it with our executives. We just didn't. But that's an amazing example of adaptability, because you work a different way and she had to adapt to the way you work. Like, it's incredible. So we truly have to operate like that.
Yeah. Let me see what else we have here. Okay, can you lay out the 3 layers of your EA team? I don't know if we have enough time to go into it in super detail, but we can quickly kind of walk through what that looks like.
So we have administrative assistant, who is the role that reports to me, and it's a very tactical, it's a little more junior. So that's like expense reports, travel, errands, gift giving, anything like that. And then we have executive assistant, which is getting to be, more of, it's still tactical, but you can maybe see things more, you're seeing operations more holistically, and you're working with your executives in a little bit more of a strategic way. And then executive business partner, which we have 4 of them, including myself at Sweetgreen. And that's what we also were at Uber. That was the leveling there as well. And that's truly like a strategic partnership with your executive. And I would say it's a hybrid between an EA and a chief of staff. You're getting towards a chief of staff territory, but most of the EVPs here are still doing expense reports, travel, that kind of stuff. So it kind of marries the tactical and the strategic. So those are the current levels we have here. And we do, I will say, our CEO does have a chief of staff. She's transitioning into a different role, but we have had that chief of staff role here as well.
Yeah. And that kind of talks a little bit about a question that Julie asked, which is, what is a career path for promotion for an executive assistant? And that is, it's different in every company. So some companies have very specific leveling guides. So it can be like, administrative assistant, executive assistant, senior executive assistant, executive business partner. Some people grow to be chiefs of staff. Some people move out of the role into something totally different, like project managers or positions in like communications. There's so many things, events. I've seen it all, because when you're in an EA role, and especially in a senior executive business partner role, you have, again, that bird's eye view over an entire organization and end up getting thrown so many random projects. And as you execute on those projects really well, you build trust with other teams, and sometimes those teams snatch you up and take them for themselves. So I hope that kind of gives you an answer. It's like kind of like the world is your oyster. It's just kind of different. I think we have one more question we can fit in, maybe 2. So what does your work-life balance look like supporting a CEO?
It kind of ebbs and flows, to be honest. Like during our IPO, the 2 months before were pure insanity, like literally working pretty much round the clock. But that was for a very specific project. And I was so excited to be included in that process. It was, I will say, once in a lifetime, but Uber went public as well. And so I've been very fortunate in my career to be, part of these experiences. But then, afterwards, everyone kind of took a breath and it got like truly quiet in the few weeks after. So it's really this wave and you have to ride it. And I will say at Sweetgreen, I have the most work-life balance I've had. And at times it's kind of stretched and I'm human, so I do get depleted. I'm an introvert, so I really need my alone time to recharge. I don't feel guilty anymore for not going to a dinner or whatever else is going on. Like if I need to just do nothing and be by myself, like I'll do that. I have no qualms about it. I have opposite of FOMO, whatever that is. Whatever the acronym is, I have the opposite of that.
No FOMO. Okay, great. And I think we can do JOMO, joy of missing out. There we go.
Yes, thank you.
JOMO. I think we can probably squeeze in one last question. And so this was talking about how you vet candidates in interviews to be the right fit, since you've been able to build these really great teams. Like, are there specific questions that you ask, or what type of traits are you looking for when you're hiring?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the types of companies they've been at matters based on what company you're at. It doesn't have to be same industry, but it needs to have some of the same values, or I guess I would use the word values. So, if it's a startup, it doesn't matter what industry it's in. Did they work fast? What is the work-life balance like? How do they think about problems? Can they give clear examples of any question you ask them? Honestly, can they give a clear example? I do find a lot of people just talk in circles without giving any solid answer. That's a red flag to me. I've had people ask what hours they would be working in the first interview. That's a red flag to me, because I'm sorry, but this role truly is like 24/7 at times, and you don't get to clock out at 5 and not answer a text from your CEO. You just don't. So if that's truly important to you, like perhaps this role is not the right fit. And then I just think, personality fit is huge. You have to get a sense of personality. Will someone be a team player, no ego, in conversations with the other admin team, but also with the executives? Like, are they going to fit personality wise with the executive? And that's, kind of a soft touch thing, but it's truly important because you're so intertwined in this person's life that you truly have to click. It doesn't matter if you've worked at the best, for Elon Musk, if you're a certain way and the executive at your company is a certain way, if they're not going to work, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And I would kind of like underline a couple points that you made just from like what we see and what we hear back from our clients about interviewing. I think giving clear, concise answers is super important. That's why we always talk about the STAR method, situation, task, action, result for every single answer that you give, because the best indicator of future success is past performance. I think what you said about it doesn't matter if you've worked in a CPG startup before, as long as you've worked in a fast hyper growth environment, because scaling is painful. Scaling, like it doesn't matter, you can be the greatest company in the world, like there's just challenges that come across scaling and adding a ton of new humans to a company. So seeing that in the past is often stuff that our clients want to see if they're planning on going through hyper growth. Other companies are like, we aren't, right? Like we are pretty static in our size, but we really want somebody who has experience working in this type of industry because they'll already know the lingo, and like that won't be a learning curve for them, right? And so it just depends.
Yeah, and I also think asking why someone wants to work at your company is huge. Like it's just important. If you don't have someone that's like stoked to work at your company, it's not a good starting point. We've had people interview at Sweetgreen that their resumes say they're interested in beauty and fashion. Sweetgreen, we sell salad. Like, why are you interviewing here? And then it's like, well, is this long-term? Or are you just needing a job ASAP? And this is launching pad. And I think it's like those kind of things. Like, you want people that are so excited about what you all are working on, because it can be all consuming at times. So if you're not lit up by the mission and the people, like it's not a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one last one that came in that I'm going to quick answer just because I can give you a great tool for concise communication, and it's mostly free, and it's called Grammarly. And I use it. I don't know if you use it, Alissa, but if you are going to be doing written communication, it helps you make sentences more concise, make sure things are grammatically correct. We actually have it for every employee in my company because we do so much written communication and resume reviewing and editing. It's an amazing tool. And I think like the premium version is pretty inexpensive as well. So that would be what I would suggest. Anything else that you recommend tool-wise for concise communication?
I have not used Grammarly, but I'm going to look into it.
It's so great. I love it. I want them to be a client of ours. If any of you work for Grammarly or have connections, I'm going to put that out into the universe. All right, well, we have to run. Thank you all so much for joining us. And if you have any other questions for Alissa, feel free to connect with her on LinkedIn. She is a coach of ours. So if you're interested in one-on-one coaching with Alissa, we would also love to hear from you as well. Have a great rest of your day.
Some questions that didn't get answered. So feel free to ping me on LinkedIn and I'll do my best to respond.
All right, thanks. Thank you so much. Bye, Alissa.